Today's guest on a Life and a Living podcast is Drew Otoo. Now, Drew is the Vice President of Marketing at Merck Pharmaceutical. He is also the global commercial lead for Pneumococcal and Zoster Vaccines. And as you can well imagine, working in the pharmaceutical industry when COVID happened, it was not a case of where the pharmaceutical companies were going to shut down and go home. They, in fact, needed to continue on and probably under greater pressure to deliver. And that was true, certainly, of Drew's team, because when everything happened, the team had to mobilize themselves and really get themselves working effectively very, very fast. And for that team, for Drew and his team, the goals were still the goals. The objectives are still the objectives. They simply didn't change. So they needed to find a way of working. And, Drew is very complimentary about his team because they certainly have done that and they have achieved the milestones that they set for themselves. And it has been a huge success for them. But looking back on that, when I asked Drew to talk about it, he says one of the critical things for them, or a couple of critical things for them, was that the vision for the business and for their division was absolutely crystal clear. There was no ambiguity. That clarity was there. The objectives were extremely clear. The plan was extremely clear. And the roles for each individual were extremely clear. And he does believe, and I would agree with him, that they were a huge part in ensuring that the team continued to work, continued to achieve, and continued to deliver. So I really encourage you to listen to Drew. He's a great speaker. He's a fantastic leader and somebody I admire hugely. So please sit back and enjoy this interview with Drew Otoo. Drew, thank you so much for being with us today on a Life and a Living podcast. It's a real honor to have you here.
Well, John, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me, and I hope today's conversation will be useful to your listeners and who are calling in from around the world.
Absolutely. Well, I've no doubt it will. I mean, just when we go back to that time in March, I mean, there you are, you're in Merck organization, you're leading, a project that has got, huge implications, all sorts of people to the organization and globally. And now suddenly everyone is told, guys, you better just go home and work from home. And, I mean, in the pharma industry, obviously you're not one of the industries like, bars or restaurants that shut down, you keep going. How did you manage to move quickly to kind of so that everything just didn't fall apart?
Well, thank you. It's a great question, and it's a combination of hard work and great timing. To be very candid with you, late last year in the fall of 2019, as my team and I looked at all the work that we had to accomplish in a very short period of time. I had just joined the organization, which further underscored just how much had to be accomplished. I decided on behalf of the team to lean in more into using virtual tools. And in this case, as an organization, we use Microsoft Teams. But frankly, we had not really leveraged the capability to its full to the full opportunity. And so in around November, I pushed the team a little bit begrudgingly into virtual work with MS Teams, leveraging the various interactions and collaboration features. And so by the time March came to us with the lockdown measures, we were well on the way to optimizing our ability to work remotely, leveraging the best technology that was available to us. As a reminder, John, to you and perhaps for the listeners today, I sit in the U.S. I have a number of colleagues that sit here, but I also have colleagues that sit in Europe, and so working virtually and leveraging technology was very important to us. And we'd also, over the first 3 months of the year, been working very hard to ensure that we minimize the separation between us. So There were oftentimes, live meetings, major meetings taking place on U.S. Eastern Standard Time that my colleagues in Europe didn't feel that they could easily participate in. And we had taken the opportunity to really rethink about our governance, and we'd implemented what we call the weekly stand-ups, 30 minutes every Monday morning, where we do a rapid fire review of key projects, key priorities, and areas that we might need the help of other team members. So by the time the lockdown measures came into place in mid-March, we were fully leveraging technology and collaboration features. We had really optimized our forums for information sharing and decision making, and that really helped us to be in a good position when these unfortunate lockdown measures came into place.
Yeah, because I mean, the nature of the work that you do, and having worked with you, I understand that you're it's not just about your division. It's not discrete in the sense that you only work with the people in your division. You're reaching out into so many other parts of the organization because it has that impact. So that made it a big challenge. But for you as kind of the leader and the manager, what was the biggest challenges that you found? Because before this, you were in the office in Philadelphia. You had the bulk of the team kind of probably within sight of you in the building. And so they were all kind of geographically close. And now suddenly you're managing remotely. For you as the leader and the manager, those people, what, the challenge for you?
That's a really great question. Um, when the lockdown measures came into place, the first question I asked myself was, would the rest of the team remain engaged and aligned? What was the physical and mental well-being of my team going to look like? How would the team manage the personal demands, those with younger kids, older kids, those perhaps even with older parents in the home with them? So those were some of the first thoughts that went through my mind. The other was for me, right? I'm no stranger to having a family myself. I also have kids. My wife had a specific routine, and now that routine and everything else was changing. So those were, two primary concerns: that of my team, that of myself. And then, as you mentioned, our ability to engage with many, many stakeholders that help us to do the job that we need to do. We have collaborations with, what we call our cross-functional team,
Mhm.
who are a multidisciplinary team of colleagues spread all over the world as well. I was very heartened that the investments that we had made as a team in developing a very clear plan, establishing great relationships with our cross-functional team, leveraging the technology that I spoke about, whether it was WebEx or some of the Microsoft collaboration tools. All of those things came into play. From an investment standpoint, we had also invested significantly in energy management and making sure that we recognize that we were people first, each with demands that are both personal and professional. So all of those things, again, our investment in the team, our investment in people, in the early part of 2020 and the latter part of 2019, all began to pay off. Um, and I was very proud of the efforts of the team. The team really rose to the occasion. We recognized that we were, again, people. We had demands and needs. We recognized that we had a significant amount of work to do professionally. And we also created as much space as possible for us each, recognizing that our routines had changed. We were managing personal burdens and priorities as well, and making sure that no one felt bad of taking care of their family and their own well-being,
Mhm.
while trying to advance our professional objectives as well.
Yeah. And did you find that you had to make any adjustments in your own style or approach, or, did you have to change that in any way?
One of the things that we did was, again, really lean into the weekly stand-ups. And one of the things I did during the weekly stand-ups is something you and I have discussed in the past of starting off with a community meeting style question. How are you feeling?
Mm.
And we wove in important icebreakers so that it was very clear to my team that I was very much interested in their well-being, what they had done over the weekend, the challenges they were going through first. And then we were able to then transition very nicely to what are the priorities you're working on and how can other members help you, not to make sure that they didn't feel isolated.
Mm.
We also instituted a rule where we didn't start our virtual meetings until 9:30 in the morning to make
Right.
sure that those who had kids at home, they could help the kids with their schooling. You know, a lot of kids were at home trying to do remote learning, where parents had to be full-time IT managers, teachers, cooks, um, keepers of the peace,
Mm.
and so that really helped as well. It frankly also made us much more attentive to the challenges that some of our remote-based colleagues in Europe had been facing for many years, right? This feeling of not being connected or not having the full context. So all of these were important items that we became much more aware of and incorporated into our routines. We also encouraged each other to not have back-to-back meetings and to take breaks, whether
Mm.
it was to take a walking break, to go outside, walk around the house, and other energy rituals to help us balance the tremendous pressures that we were all going through in and outside of our what had been our pretty normal routines.
Yeah, because I mean, the objectives that you had didn't suddenly disappear because COVID happened. You still had the same objectives, and as you mentioned there, the people working from home, and of course, different people at different circumstances have got different challenges. How did you go about supporting people? Because certainly some people working from home, from talking to in other organizations and people in the same situation where they that there's been a mixed bag of people feeling that I'm not really given the recognition of that. I've got three small kids that I'm trying to homeschool, manage, do all of that. So what were the things that you did to really support your people working from home?
One of the things that we did was first really think about the reality of the situation we all faced. We were working or expected to continue working from home.
Mm.
So, first and foremost, we had to make sure that folks had a comfortable place to work at home. And one of the things that we did amongst each other was to make sure that we had a recognition that ergonomically, for example, it's very important that you have the right kind of chair, the right kind of
Mm.
desk, and the right lighting, and the right type of environment to work. So we did spend a fair amount of time talking about this and sharing tips. I must say our organization at Merck was very attentive to this and made some provisions to be able to support employees in this regard, whether it was acquiring office supplies or the right kind of furniture. Merck has always been an organization that, in addition to having a very clear purpose, to discover, to develop, and introduce innovative medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives around the world, there's also a very clear focus on employee well-being,
Mm.
and that was also very helpful. We were not trying to convince our organization to give us what we needed to be optimal at home. So that was one. The second was to try to create as much of a safe space as possible. There was no shame about raising your hand, and I had to model some of this to say I it's okay to to use vernacular and language that articulate how we feel. It's okay and perfectly normal to to express the challenges of things that we were balancing, whether it was, again, kids at home, feeding the kids, feeding the family, buying food. And we shared this openly amongst ourselves, so that no one felt that this was off limits. It was very much a safe space, but we had to work at this. I had to model some of that behavior, and we had to learn from one another as well.
Mm. And when you look back over the period, I mean, I think that, well, for all of us, certainly I speak for myself. When this all happened in March, and my head was kind of saying, well, it'll be a few months, but come the summer, we'll be we'll be through this. Now, maybe you might have had better insight, but I mean, here we are in November, and we're still probably with no end in sight, and not any clear road to actually getting there. But when you look back at that time, how would you rate the productivity in the business overall? Not necessarily in your team, but overall in the business. How would Merck view the productivity in the business? Did it change? Did it go up? Did it go down? What was it?
So as you know, Merck is a very large
Yeah.
organization, and so perhaps what I might do is focus first on my team and then expand broadly to see how I can adequately describe a good response to your question. Like you, we thought this was first a 2 week quarantine and that we would be back in 2 weeks, and 2 weeks became a month became three, and as you said, it's more than 6 months of working in this way. So our expectations certainly evolved over time. Um, I honestly have to say I've been extremely proud in the efforts of my team. I can comfortably say we have almost doubled productivity,
Wow.
and a significant amount of effort and work has been done in this period of time. You have folks who are focused. Yes, there are many distractions. Yes, the settings have changed. But we also don't have many of the distractions that were part of our routine way of working, spending 2 hours commuting
Mm.
into the office, um, trying to work very hard to schedule meetings with people, um, we trying to collaborate with people, and leveraging again technology to radically reduce the amount of time it took for us to create content, review content, solicit feedback, finalize that content, and then deploy that content. It gave us a great ability to connect with colleagues all around the world that have been working this way for a while, right? Working
Yeah.
remotely across different time zones. And now all of a sudden, we were frankly all in the same boat. So we did go through obviously some growing pains, but I've been very proud of the productivity of the team. In fact, my biggest concern now is mental well-being. That for all of the productivity and being on all the time, um, unfortunately having a blurring of when you start work to when you end work, those lines being erased and it's much more seamless has a downside. And so I've been very proud of the productivity of the team. I think our organization, as big as it is, we have um, folks across many divisions on the commercial, on research and development and manufacturing, and they also have been exemplary in their efforts to keep going. Why? I think it's a big part of the mission that everyone is centered on efforts to discover, develop, and advance innovative medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives around the world. And you've seen that really people step up, be have a huge amount of ingenuity to keep things going, remain safe, and safeguard themselves from the disease, and try to minimize transmission, but always remember that everything we do is to make sure that people have access to medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives. So I've just been blown away by the purpose and the dedication. And my biggest concern is making sure that people can energize themselves and they can switch off a bit.
Yeah. And, here we are kind of 8 months down the road, which is extraordinary when you say it out loud, that it's 8 months down the road. And I mean, if you had the time over again, would you do anything differently?
That's a really great question. At this time, I don't think so.
All right.
Um, from the very beginning, we all acknowledged that we were in this together. We all acknowledged the importance of continuing to invest in each other, continuing to experiment with ideas that could improve and enhance our ways of working, leveraging technology. We talked about the weekly stand-ups, and those are just two ideas of things that we did just to make sure that we were engaged, that we had the space, we had the mental opportunity to recharge, to support our family. So no, I wouldn't do anything differently um, based on where I am today.
Oh, that's a good thing to be able to say. But looking back on it, I mean, when you reflect on it, what are the things that you would say that you've learned about yourself and you learned maybe about your team, that you think about now? Because it was, I mean, let's face it, it's uncharted waters for everybody. Nobody, there was no blueprint for this. There was no manual for this. You really had to make it up as you went along. So the learning for you and the learning for the team, what would you think they are?
Great question. A few. I think the first is this opportunity did give us a chance to see each other as people and
Mhm.
to better understand while we are in different areas, perhaps different walks of life, there were many commonalities. We have families, current families, extended families. Some may have children, some not have children. Um, it gave us a greater sense of people's hobbies and what they do, who they are. It gave us a chance to see people for who they are versus just someone that kind of shows up, drives into work, or is just an image on a screen. So that was a really important reminder underscoring our collective humanity, number one. The second, I think it taught us the importance of being willing to experiment, to be willing to do things differently. As I mentioned, we leaned into leveraging the technology platforms, not knowing that we had a 3-month head start on
Yeah.
everyone else. And so we were able to hit the ground running, but also serve as an inspiration for our other colleagues who perhaps were slower adopters.
Yeah.
I think it gave us an opportunity to reinforce the importance of energy management. We had spoken about energy management before, but now we really had a clear sense of the importance of physical energy, spiritual energy, mental energy, and all of those things that are important to help us be our best for work and then for our families. Those are a few things
Mhm.
that really came into sharp focus as a result of the pandemic. And perhaps one other item is the importance of planning and purpose. So at Merck, again, we have this overriding purpose. And so everything we do ladders up to that. Is everything that we're doing laddering up to discovering, developing, and advancing innovative medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives around the world, number one. Number two, it was very important that we had a plan. So, as you said, pandemic or no pandemic, our objectives largely didn't
Yeah.
change. And we were able to remain focused because we had a plan.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, one of the interesting things I think about COVID is that in some ways it's been an accelerator. In the sense of, I mean, we talked about, I mean, working from home is not new, obviously, and it's been around, but kind of 100% of people working from home 100% of the time, that was new. And I suppose as we look forward, and if you look into your crystal ball, I mean, whenever we come out of this situation, whenever we come out of COVID, and there is now, okay, everybody can go back to the office. What changes do you think that will bring? Because it won't be the same. What changes do you think it'll bring to a new way of working?
It's a wonderful question. I have a sense of what it might look like, but I'm also very humble to recognize that I don't have a full picture of what it will look like. It won't look the
No,
same, as you
no.
said. Um, I think we've all recognized that spending 1.5 hours commuting one way to work every day probably isn't the best use of time. I think we have perhaps a better discernment of what are our what are situations where having people together makes sense, and where working remotely or working uh, in leveraging technology makes sense as well. So I think we're going to become more discerning, more fit for purpose, in terms of our interactions and the types of engagements that we have. I do think it's impacted our homes. For many of us, we've had to create these enclaves of a desk and a chair and a computer, where we can conduct our work, and it's caused us to physically change the layout of some of our homes, right? Where you convert an extra bedroom here to an office, and maybe a corner in the basement to an office area. And I think that will continue. I think people who are going to be looking to buy homes, looking at homes, are going to be making different accommodations. I think it's going to impact our hiring, where now perhaps we may not be bound with having someone either relocate or looking for people
Yes.
close
Yeah.
to a specific
Yeah.
geographic center. Now it's perhaps a little bit open. So
Yeah.
I do think it's going to change. I heard someone say that it takes 41 days plus or minus for something to become habit. We've been in this pandemic for a few multiples of that.
Absolutely.
And so I do think some of these things are going to become habits now, and some of them may stick, some of them may evolve.
Yeah. But I think that, before we wrap up, I think it's great credit to you and to the organization that you were in a situation where you were able to do it and that you were a position that you could do it. But also I think that, if somebody had said to you in January, Drew, we're going to get your team to stay at home and work 100%. You would have gone, oh God, please don't do that to me. Please do not do that to me. And yet, but yet you said, you've not only made it work, but you've actually, you've increased the productivity. The people are there; they're being really effective. I think it's a great credit. So, Drew, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate the fact that you shared your experience as a senior leader in a major organization, and it's been hugely valuable to get your perspective and take it. So thank you indeed for joining us today on A Life and a Living.
Well, John, it's my pleasure. Hopefully, our discussion will be useful again to the other business leaders and colleagues that have listened to the discussion today. But it's my pleasure. Thank you.